Next, we acquire a team. Once we figure out who we need, we have our activities, we have our resource needs established. Now we acquire that team. Now understand, this is the piece that I always, when I first studied this in depth, I said, wait a minute, I'm already acquiring a team, or they're giving me a team. I inherited a team. As a contract project manager, and even as an employee project manager, you're sometimes dropped into a problem situation where things are ongoing. So you may be in the middle of your project and not starting it, meaning the charter may be done, the requirements may be gathered, and you're hired to come in and fix a problem, or you're brought in to kind of right a ship that may be a little off. So acquiring the team, when we talk about it here, may seem like, well, I don't do that very often. I already have a team. And that's fine. But when we talk about it here, it's important to understand we're always acquiring people. We're always having people leave and people come in. So it's an important piece to wrap our hands around, understand what we're trying to accomplish. Our inputs here are our project resource management plan, our enterprise environmental factors, our organizational process assets. We have pre-assignment, like I was saying. Things are pre-assigned. You know who you have as a team because either you work with them regularly and they're already assigned to you, and they may even report to you in some kind of a structured reporting area. Or they're pre-assigned because they have expertise in a particular area that your project is about. So pre-assignment is one of the tools we use. We figure out who's already on board. We also negotiate. So if we don't have skill sets that we need or people that we need, we negotiate, and we'll talk about how to negotiate. We also have acquisition. I'm a contract project manager. If you want me to work for you, you have to acquire me. So we'll talk about how acquisition happens, whether it's vendor acquisition, where you're pulling in a vendor, whether it's a pre-established way of acquiring people, or whether it is something that's unique to your project. We have virtual teams. When you acquire a team, not everybody may be co-located with you, and we'll talk about that term. Co-located means that you exist in the same physical space. It can be in the same city, it can be in the same building, it can be on the same floor, it can be in the same nest of cubicles. Virtual teams means that doesn't exist. Most teams exist, in my experience, most teams exist in both ways. Why? Because people are not always co-located. There are mergers, which means we bring different organizations from different areas together. We have a lot more offshoring, which is by nature a virtual team. We have people who work from home. We have people that call in from their cars, from a different location because they're with a vendor. So the idea of virtual teams is something that you really have a hard time getting away from in this day and age. So we'll look at virtual teams and some of the tools and techniques you can use in using virtual teams. We'll also look at multi-criteria decision analysis. We've already seen that, but we'll look at it again. And part of this is figuring out who's the best person based on criteria. So maybe you have somebody who is very expensive, but you may want to use them because they have a unique skill set. So their skill set may overwhelm the fact that they'll cost you more. Or maybe you can get 3 people to do their job and it'll be cheaper, but you can still get the tasks done, the activities accomplished, the deliverables on time and on budget. Now, our outputs are a staff assignment. Obviously, what we're trying to do is to acquire a team. So we have our staff assignments. Either they're assigned to us or we assign them ourselves as the project manager. But we bring them in. We negotiate for their time. We acquire them, etc. We have our resource calendars. Everybody's calendar is different. Everybody has different social commitments and social holidays. Every organization has different days off. Some people take a number of days off for national holidays. Well, what if your team has different nationalities? Do you have that worked into your calendar? There are no right and wrong here. The point is, when you acquire a team, you need to understand and build that resource calendar so you know when people are available to you and when they're not, so you can be successful with the project. We also have updates to our project management plan, which is obvious. We've acquired the team, and part of that project management plan would be the things we've learned about acquiring the team, how we acquire the team. You might even have a note of the names and contact information of the team. That's completely possible and is often done, but we have updates to that. Now, in acquiring the team, one of the things that you need to understand about people, as we acquire people, we have different interpersonal styles. Interpersonal styles here, this is just a standard breakdown of interpersonal styles. There are dozens of ways of doing this. There's everything from the 4-quadrant, there's an 8-quadrant, there's a lot of different ways. Here we're looking on this in 4 different ways. And this is a tool. This is simply a tool to be able to say, what do I need and how are people really wired? Some people tend to be less dominant, less sociable, and it tends to put them in an analytic mode. That's what we call it. They're not dominant. They may not be the first person to talk. They're not necessarily social, but they do bring information to the table, but it may be an analytic type of way. It may be numbers that are crunched. It may be analysis that is done, hence analytic. Other people are less dominant and more sociable. We call these amiable. Because they're less dominant, they don't have to be in the front, but they always are nice or tend to be nice. You see these people. This is not, everything I'm talking about here, you've probably seen in multiple ways before. I'm just going to glance through this real quick to remind you of it so we can use some of these terms. And when we talk about building teams and about maintaining teams and about our communication styles. The driver interpersonal style is more dominant, less sociable. That means that they tend to be the person that is directive. They tend to be in charge because that's their nature, whether or not they have that position or not, but they tend to be in charge in any social situation. They also tend to be less mindful of social conveniences and contrivances, meaning they may not be as perceived as nice as somebody who is amiable, more sociable. The expressive tends to be more dominant, more sociable. They understand the sociability of expression, of interaction with people. But they also tend to be dominant. They may show off a little, they may take charge, they may be more expressive in what they're doing. I am generally put in an expressive framework when I'm tested or analyzed or surveyed in this particular modality of interpersonal styles. So I tend, personally, to be a social person. I understand sociability, but I also tend to be dominant, meaning I will take charge. Being a teacher is helpful in that. Being a project manager, it fits my personality. The projects I take on, I tend to take them on in that vein. But understand, I can be any one of these interpersonal styles given the right circumstances, given the right motivations and needs to be in these areas. And as a project manager, what you're trying to do is understand these styles so you understand your team, your stakeholders, your sponsors, the people you have around you that are there to make you and the project successful, but also to understand yourself and understand how you can adjust your style to help others feel comfortable and be successful. Now, negotiations. There are 4 simple steps. This is a simple 4-step path to negotiations. There are 4 steps here. The first, if you're trying to negotiate something, you need to be prepared. You need to know what you're negotiating. You need to know who you're negotiating with. You need to know what your goals, your objectives, that kind of thing. So preparation is the first step. Be prepared. That can take you days, hours, or minutes, depending on what you're negotiating. Are you negotiating for a person? Well, you need to know what it is you need about that person. What are the critical pieces of that person's background, skill sets, etc., that match well with what you need within your team. So be prepared to be able to articulate those things clearly and concisely, and also be prepared to defend this choice for this person. That's an example of preparation. There's an exchange of ideas in a negotiation. I'm prepared. I know what I want. I know what I'm willing to give, because there's an exchange. You tell me what you want. I tell you what I want. There's an exchange of ideas. Every negotiation has that. Even if it's the negotiation of when your child goes to bed. I want to stay up. I want you to go to bed. That's an exchange. You have a diametrically opposed points of view at that point. But if you've prepared as the parent, you know what your arguments are going to be for them going to bed. We've agreed your bedtime is 9 o'clock. Or we've told you your bedtime is 9 o'clock, depending on the age of the child. So, preparation, exchange of information. There's explicit bargaining. That means if you let me stay up a little later, then I'll clean my room tomorrow. That would be explicit bargaining. Or I'll let you stay up for another 5 minutes, but you have to pick up your room during that time. It's all about what you need. In corporate, when you're working with people, it could be, I need Rajesh for this particular assignment. Within my group, he has the most expertise in that technology, and I need him. The response could be, well, you can't have him for the time that you want him. Can I have him for 2 months? We'll backfill it after 2 months. Give him to me for that assignment, and I'll figure out someone else that can do the last 2 months. But I need him to get things launched, to get things started. The expertise is critical. And the person that you're negotiating with may say yes or no. But there's an explicit bargaining back and forth. Then there's a commitment. Yes, you can have this resource. Yes, you can stay up. Or no, you can't. No is an answer in negotiations. It is not always what we want to hear if we're one of the parties negotiating, but no is a valid answer. There is explicit that there's some commitment at the end. You have an agreement of some sort, a commitment. It can be a commitment to, let's put a pin in this and discuss it later. We don't make a decision, but we move forward with our communication, our daily work, and then we'll discuss this at a later time. So negotiations are not simplistic, but this four-step path is generally a way of looking at it that will help you negotiate things within your project, within your organization. There are generally 5 different negotiating styles that are used. And these are not professional negotiating styles. They are what is generally seen in people, because all of us negotiate. We have the avoider. They don't want to negotiate. They avoid negotiations. They don't want to have a commitment, perhaps. Or maybe the topic that's being negotiated is something that they don't want to talk about. It's not comfortable. They may be not a very vocal person, and you want them to discuss something. So if it's emotionally not comfortable, they may avoid. So avoiding is a style that is not just a person. We don't plug that into a single entity, a single individual, and that's what they do every time. It may be conditional to the type of negotiation you're doing. We all avoid negotiations at times. That's just a style that we have gone to. But most people have a go-to style, meaning a style that, given no other information, that's where they'll kind of go to. The compromiser, we've met them, it's split at 50-50. That's the compromiser's always looking for a compromise, a shift from the two parties, either themselves or someone else, and trying to come up with a way that we can come to a commitment. So in their explicit bargaining, they're always looking for that compromise. You give a little, I'll give a little. We'll meet in the middle. You have the accommodator. The accommodator is a style where we will use it when we really don't have a strong feeling or emotional connection with the results, with the commitment. For instance, if you ask your significant other, let's go to dinner, where do you want to go? And they say, let's go here. And if you might be, you might have been thinking, I don't want to go to this, Thai restaurant. I wanted to go Italian. But maybe you don't feel that strongly about it. You might accommodate. Sure, let's do Thai. Doesn't matter as much, so you accommodate. Where it hits a little differently in corporate is when you have someone who has an accommodating negotiating style, and it's not about that they don't care, but they just feel unempowered or unskilled at being able to push their opinion out there and explicitly bargain for that position or that situation. So accommodating style, if it's your natural style, you have to be aware that you're in negotiations all the time and you need to treat them like negotiations. You need to think about, you need to prepare. You need to be ready to explicitly put your case out there. Use your other skills. If you're the project manager, your PM powers at work. Understand who you're negotiating with. What is their interpersonal style? Are they a driver? Are they analytic? Are they expressive? Those kinds of things. So the accommodator. Then you have the competitor. They're the ones that always want to win. We know competitive personalities. We use that term often in cultural and corporate settings. I'm a competitor. Well, in negotiating styles, it really means you want to win. So we've met people like that when we've negotiated cars or we've negotiated terms on a contract. It's not necessarily, none of these styles are good or bad. It's all in the context of what you're trying to accomplish. As a project manager, understanding these negotiating styles allows you to communicate more effectively. And in this situation, we're focused on acquiring our project team. So you want the best persons available. Competitiveness is one of the styles you may be going against. If somebody else wants all the good people in your company and you're left without having the skill sets necessary for you to be successful, you need to be aware of it. Be aware. Then you have the problem solver. They are looking at the negotiating as a problem to be solved. So what can you get and I get and we all are feeling good about it? It's the win-win, as we've heard of. So it's not simply, I'm going to give over to you, which is what the accommodator does. It's not simply, well, let's just look 50-50. It's really not a problem solver. That's someone who is always looking for middle ground. And it's not, I'll let you have whatever you want. That's the avoider. I don't even want to negotiate. The problem solver looks for another option. What could we do that might solve both of our needs? Could we split this resource for the time? Could you work with that? Would you be successful? And I'll see what I can do on my side. Why don't we bring in a new person? We've always wanted to cross-train. Let's cross-train and bring in someone new from the outside. Oh, by the way, I've already identified a couple of possible resources based on my network that I have out there. So the problem solver is always thinking of win-win. I want you to get what you want. I want me to get what I want. And I'm willing to think outside the normal, I get it or you get it. And think about being whole, if you will. I get everything I want, you get everything you want. That's what win-win is all about. When looking for the win-win in a negotiation, what you're looking for is to move from the adversarial to a cooperative framework. Either you can do it physically by not sitting across a table with each other, maybe sit in that more comfortable couch or chairs kind of facing, but being able to relate to each other. One of the most adversarial type of arrangements is the big desk and the little chairs on the other side. That tends to create a separation. So anything you can do to create more cooperative will help us go for a win-win. And yes, I think a win-win is what we all need to be working towards. It's the best negotiating situation, especially when you're dealing with projects in an organizational setting, because you don't want to set yourself up as an adversary to anyone, because you don't know who you're going to need in order for your project to be successful. So, you want to develop trust by listening. Listening actively to people will help them understand that and develop a trust with you. You understand what their issues are, their problems are, and they will get a sense that you are listening. One of the things I used to tell people when I'm dealing with business analysis specifically is that you look at the business and your possible sponsor or your person that has a problem, your business person that has a problem. And the first thing you want to do is before I can build you a solution, I have to first acknowledge, I hear you. You have a problem. And here's what it looks like to me, which comes from listening to them. And I'm here to help you fix it. That's what a business analyst does, because their job, in part, is to listen to the business and translate the business problems into ways in which others can fix them, either through bringing in solutions or by building them internally, whatever. Here is an example of you develop trust by listening in a negotiation. Then you explore options for mutual satisfaction. The idea here is that I'm not getting everything I want necessarily, you aren't getting everything you want necessarily, but maybe we can find a solution that mutually does satisfy us. I'm not giving you half and you're giving me half. If you negotiate for a car, and I come in and I'm negotiating for a car, and you tell me the price is $10,000, and I only want to pay $5,000. So if I walk out of there and I've spent $7,500 for this car, now I didn't get what I wanted when I walked in because I'm spending more money than I wanted. You're not getting what you want because I'm spending less than you asked for. So we didn't both win. We just compromised and we kept going. Win-win is not about simply compromising and keep going. That's sometimes what we have to do. But when you're looking for the win-win, you're looking for a way to have both people get mutual satisfaction in the results of your negotiation. It's not simply finding the middle ground. That may be where you go, but it's not what you're looking for in this type of win-win scenario. You frame the problem being discussed. You don't focus on the positions. Oh, what do I mean by that? I mean that you look at it, there's a problem here. It's not, you're a problem and I'm a problem for you, or you're in this position and I'm in this position. You don't focus on that. You try and frame the conversation, frame the communication in a way that looks at, we have a problem. We have a mutual resource we both are going to need, and we need to figure out how we can move forward and both have that resource for the time and that we need them. Because I can't have the resource and you have the resource at the same time. So you look for it as a problem. The problem is the resource does not have, we don't have enough resources that can do a specific skill set. Well, how do we solve that problem? Maybe get more resources. Maybe cross-train other resources. Maybe share that resource for particular times that doesn't become problematic for either party. So you're trying to frame this as a problem of resource, not as you need him, I need him, what do we do? It's just a different way of framing it that becomes less aggressive and less problematic for the other person, emotionally perhaps. Remember, if you're looking at their interpersonal styles, they may want to be very competitive with it. But if you can diffuse the competitiveness by having it framed as a problem, it may be helpful for you to find a mutual solution. So characteristics of effective negotiators, and negotiators here, we all negotiate. So we're looking at this as something that's a skill set we all can develop. and be effective with. Highly prepared. Remember what I said before. Know what you want, know what you're going in there with, open-mindedness, but prepared. Who are you negotiating against? Those kinds of things. Have high expectations. Don't go into a negotiation with the idea you're going to come out with nothing. You may have to get competitive. There are some negotiations that become highly competitive and there's no way for you to reframe it and find things. So you need to have a high expectation. Now, part of that high expectation may be that you can find that mutual win-win scenario. That's what I try and do. You have to have an expectation going in before you can get a solution coming out. Be a good listener. Listen to people. If there's one thing that I will say a couple of times in our lectures is about communication is be a good listener. Listen to people. Listen to them. It's a very important thing to maintain and to do. If you are listening, you're not talking. If you are reframing, that's different. But be a good listener. In negotiating, knowing where the issues are with someone, knowing where their pain points are, will help you reframe the conversation so you can find that win-win. Have personal integrity. An effective negotiator doesn't go back on their word. They don't twist things later on. If you've committed to a solution in a negotiation, stand by it. If you have to change from that committed solution, then talk to the party and reopen the negotiation. But to be an effective negotiator, you really have to have that personal integrity portion of it. Now, the barriers that we have some barriers to negotiations come in different packages. We have the die-hard bargainers. They're going to try and squeeze everything and try and get as much as they can for their side. That's an old school philosophy, still used, still in practice, but it is something to be aware of. If you're negotiating with vendors for services, that can happen. You have a lack of trust can be a barrier. If I don't trust what you're saying, it's hard for me to come up with a win-win. If I don't think you're really in it for that purpose, to be really a win-win, where we can find something we mutually agree with and not simply trying to get what you want out of it. There's a lack of information. If I don't understand all the information, it's hard to negotiate. So it's hard to know. If I ask you for a resource and I say, I need this particular resource for this 3-month project, and you tell me they're not available, well, if there's more information there, like they would be available after a month, but I'm asking for them to start on Monday, they're not available. Well, lacking that information, well, if I waited a week, they would be available. Maybe I can push a week. You don't know until you have information. So getting good information is important to the negotiations. Talking about facts and not getting what's behind the facts can be very dangerous when you're trying to negotiate something. The corporate structure can be an impediment to it. Negotiations, perhaps I can't negotiate with you even though you control the resource because you've been told not to negotiate with me because I'm a contract project manager, perhaps. Or maybe I'm needing a resource from outside and there's problems getting that resource because of the structure of the procurement process, bringing vendors on board. And it may take a while. So that's a barrier to even beginning a negotiation. And it can be, different levels in the corporate structure are not allowed to negotiate with each other. It can be a lot of different things. In general, there can be some structural elements that become impediments to the negotiating process. And you have spoilers, people who jump out and will either grab resources or make decisions that are outside what you're trying to do in a good faith effort with other people. Cultural differences can play part of this. If you have a multinational company, or you have even a national company with people in different parts of the country, the idea of negotiating the movement of one person who is stationed in say in DC, in a very urban environment, and you want to move them into a real rural environment in maybe out west. So there's a difference in time zones, etc. But you want them working together. You want it can be a barrier even in talking about it, because we can't get off the ground. You can't even set up the meeting. Or it can be a barrier in negotiations because there's so much not known about the different environments. It must be way different if we are in these two different environments. So how can we possibly work together? How can we pull these people together and have them have a meaningful conversation, much less work on a project together? It's just a barrier, something to be aware of, that in our cultural differences can set up arbitrary barriers. Some cultures are more used to the idea of negotiations. Haggling in the Middle East is a way of life. But in the United States, we don't tend to haggle as much. If you walk into a Walmart and you pick up a bag of candy and you go to the front and you go, you know, I'll give you $1 for it. Well, it's $2. Well, no, I'll give you $1. I'll give you $1.50. How about that? They'll go, no, sir, it's $2. Why? Because that item has a specific price that has been set, and culturally, that's what we understand. You walk into a bazaar in several parts of the Middle East and other places in the world, everything's negotiated. Everything's haggled. So you pick up something and you give a price and they give a price and you work it out. That's the nature of their culture. So certain cultures are more used to the negotiating and the haggling over price or condition or whatever. So you just need to be aware of that. Some of us are very used to it, some of us aren't. And then there's the communication problem. Do we know what we're saying, how we're saying it? Even people that speak the same language sometimes don't speak the same language. So there can be communication problems. When I say, I need a C++ programmer with 10 years experience. Well, if the C++ programmer that's available has only 8 years experience, and I look at that communication from the point of view of, well, it doesn't meet the requirements. No, there is none. If I knew that there was one but only 8 years experience, I might be able to rethink my requirements. It is a problem today in negotiations for resources, because we're doing computer searches on resumes, and we might say, I need a person with this much experience or this language skill or this, name it. And if I do a search on resumes, I may find that or I may not, but I'm not necessarily doing a smart search on it, not doing a ranged search of between 8 and 10 years. I might be doing just 10 years. You said you needed 10 years. They don't have 10 years. They're off. So it's important that we understand the communication problems that can exist. They can exist within the technologies that we're using, as well as between individuals that are trying to make each other understand each other. And we will talk about this in communication management in a little bit more detail, but it is a part of the negotiating problem system way of doing it. criteria decision-making for acquiring a team. One of the things that we need to look at is the criteria, the availability of the people that we're looking at, the cost of the people that we're needing, the experience that is deemed part of this. And experience is a difficult thing. Do you want a range of experience? Do you want it specific to a computer language, as we've talked about before, or a technology? So it's important. The ability. Well, you may have experience in something, but you may not be very capable. I don't mean that in any bad way. It just happens. Some people are more capable than others. So experience is a parameter, a piece. Ability is another parameter, another piece. There are a lot of people who I know that are very skilled at doing something, but have no formal education in it or formal certification in a particular thing. Project management. I know several project managers who have never gotten certified because they've been doing it for 30 years and they never stood a test to validate that experience in any kind of methodology, standardization, what have you. Does it mean they're not qualified? Not necessarily. It's a piece of it. It's a parameter. We're looking at the parameters. So here's a score. Here's a way of doing multi-criteria. We have 4 criteria: the availability, the cost, the experience, and the ability. And we grade this out, and we can come up with a score. You can take, people do this all the time with resumes. They put it together, and they come up with a score. Who's the most important person? And this is by no means the only way to do it. This is not, I'm not giving you a formula that you need to take and memorize. This is a concept that we're talking about. What's important to you and your organization? If all of your people are employees, then the idea of looking at the cost for the people may not be pertinent if it doesn't hit your budget in any real way. Ability and experience can be looked at one or the other or both. It depends on what you want. And you can add other things to this. It may be that one of these factors, cost or availability, may be a binary gateway. It may be something that either, if they're more expensive than $100 an hour, we're not interested. So if that comes up, they're just canceled out. Same thing can be with availability. I need somebody by next Tuesday. If they're not available by next Tuesday, they're canceled out. It doesn't matter if they're the best person out there. If those things are hard, fast parameters that you're looking at. Resource calendar. We have resource calendars, and we have the format is optional. You can do them in a lot of different ways. They sometimes look like matrices, and they sometimes look like different things. But you want to put one together. It contains the name, the role or skills. It has the dates available. Allocation. Now, what's the difference between availability and allocation? Availability means that someone's available. I'm available to you right now, but I'm only allocated to this video and this lecture for as long as you turn it on. In the real world, it's a little different. I may be available for the month of January to you, but I'm allocated only 50% of my time. So only 50% of my available work hours are given to your project. Even though I'm available that month, you only get 50% of my available work hours. So that's how availability and allocation work. And when you put those together, you get an understanding and can report it into a calendar about every resource. We have conflicts. You have a wedding. You have a religious holiday. something that would conflict with you doing work. Those need to be in the resource calendar. Now, we're developing a project team. We've acquired it, we're developing it. Our inputs here include our human resource management plan, our project staff assignments, our resource calendars. We use our interpersonal skills, which we've talked about already. We use that. Our training, we may have to train people because we're developing the team. They may need training to help enhance their skills. We use team building activities. Those can be a lot of different things. We have ground rules. So we're building the team. We have ground rules we want to set so that they know what we expect of them as the project manager. We have co-location we've talked about. That's when everyone is located at the same place or the same general area. We have recognition and rewards, which is something we use to develop the team. We recognize the team for good works. We reward them. We have personnel assessment tools. Lots of different personnel assessment tools are out there. Human Resources uses these all the time. And whatever's available and used within your organization, within your team, within your PMO, that's what we would use. We also have outputs of the team performance assessments. We've talked about this before. Here's where it really is important to know how people are doing. It helps us in refocusing and redeveloping individuals in the project team. We also have our enterprise environmental factors updated because we are learning things through the development of our team and we may need update. Now, in the development of a team, Tuckman has 5 stages. This was a gentleman who looked at team building specifically, and it's something that in a certification we look at, i.e. there's usually a question about this particular way of looking at a team and the development of a team. Tuckman stage, we said we start the development of team, we form it. So there's a forming stage. We're putting it together. We're bringing the people together. Then we have storming. Well, that group of people doesn't know each other. They have different interpersonal styles. They may have different personality traits. They come from different places. There may be cultural differences. But we storm usually when we bring a group of people together. They don't work together the way perfectly at the beginning. It doesn't mean that they blow up, but that's when we find these differences and are working out the kinks. We all have this, and we all can recognize this in any team that was brought together. But then we normalize it. It gets norming. And the norming part is talking about that idea that we are learning each other's pattern styles, we're working better together, and this is when we start actually being able to be a better functioning team. And then we're performing. We perform, then adjourn. You could say deforming is sometimes used instead of adjourning. But we perform. It's after we've gotten everyone together, we've figured out our differences in the storming process, we've normalized our relationships so that we kind of understand, have come to agreement, we may have negotiated some things, and then we can perform. We get highly productive in the performing phase generally. That's when you look to get a lot of work done. And that's why we drive towards the performing area. We want everyone performing well. Now, the thing that with this type of thought, this way of looking at the stages of development for a team, the big thing that you need to understand is that every time the team changes, we potentially go through the same stages of development. So if you introduce a new team member, you may have some forming, storming, norming, performing going on before you ever come to the end of the project and the team goes apart. Now, leadership and management style during the project life cycle and early there tends to be the directing style. You're directing early. When you gain momentum, you're coaching. You're coaching people up. Significant work completed, you're facilitating. Facilitating that style. And we've talked about the management styles a bit. So I'm just showing you how it works within the life cycle. And then you have closing. You're supporting people. People are going to other projects. People are moving to other work. We have virtual teams. The reason for supporting these teams are the ability to create the geographically separated, distributed teams. We're not in the same locations. I know teams that are virtual teams even though they live in the same city. Why? Because they have different locations, different offices that they work in. And not always is it convenient for people to cross a city, cross a campus even, to be able to be in the same room, much less a lot of, with the virtual teams booming now in a lot of environments, conference rooms are at a premium. So it's hard to get a conference room that will accommodate your team. So the idea behind we support the virtual teams because of this geographically distributed team concept that is the way of the world. There are cost savings for teams because you don't have the travel. So if you had a team that was in two different cities, to have a meeting with those people would cost money to have them come to the city that you're in, to have them stay in the city, etc. So there's a cost. And the cost savings is significant in the world today. Plus we have advanced tools that we use to do conference calling, video conferencing. There's a lot of things. So we need to support virtual teams. And the ability to expand our expertise. There was a time when I was working with a group and I needed a specific set of information. And that information I found out through a network source was there was a person in Tel Aviv who knew what I was trying to find, had an expertise, had written several papers on it. So not only was I able to get the papers, look at the papers and see what they were doing, but reach out to them and make them an expert in absentia for my team so we could ask questions of this person and they could get information. So you expand your possibility of expertise if you think in terms of virtual teams. It also supports the work from home initiatives that are going on in a lot of large companies. If we think in terms of virtual teams, then the project manager does not have to be with the developers, the testers, or whoever. They don't have to be with the business owners. They can be at home and they can call in and they can use the tools and techniques, the video conferencing, etc., to be able to support that. And in that way, you have people who are working virtually from home, and that's one of the initiatives that certain companies are promoting heavily these days. And you can utilize talent that may have the inability to travel. They're not mobile. So there are certain disabled people who have a certain disability that does not affect their mental capacity or their ability to do certain work, but you can support them in a virtual team a lot easier than you would if you had to have the building and were requiring them to be in a lot of movement. I know myself, I'm not officially disabled, but I have 2 artificial knees, meaning my knees are not original equipment. And they were replaced about 6 years ago. I'm not disabled, but I understand the disabilities that certain people have and how it can limit their activities, and especially in certain buildings that are not really conducive to that type of thing. One of my limitations, and we all have limitations, My limitations is walking great distances for meetings. That can be a limiting factor. And that's me personally. Now, other people have limitations. When we look at utilizing talent that are either disabled or have limited mobility, we're just talking about, remember that not everybody is created equally. Virtual teams and the concept of it, of utilizing them, allows us to open up our definition of who is our team, who is my talent pool that I can bring in. And it allows you to bring in and utilize people you might not have thought of before and have them help you be successful. Key terms to remember. You need ground rules. You have a team. You need ground rules so they know how to interact with each other. Ground rules are not the things, the bad things to do. It's to understand how we interact. With a team, how do I communicate? Do I use my cell phone? Do I use my speakerphone on my desk? Do I use texting? Do I use email? What's the preferred? What's the backup? How do we get in touch? How do we stay in touch with each other? Are we documenting? Do we have things like a shared space that we can do collaborative work online? Or do we do it offline? Do we have conference rooms? If we do, what are our supplies like? Is it all dry erase boards? Can we take pictures of those dry erase images with our cell phones? Is that allowed? Those kinds of things are ground rules, and they need to be explicitly at least stated, if not documented and put somewhere within your project documents, so that people understand. You bring someone new in, they can look at this ground rules and say, this is sort of how we work, so they know. I worked a contract one time, and we were given laptops, and it wasn't until I left and was going to turn in my laptop that I discovered that we weren't supposed to take them home. Now, I didn't know. And it was not like I got any more than a slap on the wrist because of doing it. So I didn't get in trouble. But those ground rules were never explicitly stated and documented. I never signed off on that. And it was not really a big deal because we travel with laptops all the time. I mean, I couldn't imagine it being any different. But that's an example of if everything's explicitly stated, you don't have the oops things happening. Having a conference call on your speakerphone at your desk, disturbing other people. If that's not allowed, you need to be informed of it before you make someone uncomfortable or upset. So, ground rules. Co-location, we've talked about that. No recognition and rewards. It's a key term when we talk about our certification because it kind of goes in this group of things that they may be talking about with certain scenarios. Do we reward people or recognize them? Is it a tool, etc.? We have motivation. We want to be sure that we look at how to motivate our teams. Now we'll look at managing your project team. You've acquired these people, you've assessed the skills and what you need, and now we're actually managing the team in place. Now, I understand you can be acquiring and managing simultaneously. You can be doing a lot of these processes concurrently. Here we're going to look at it specifically. Our inputs include the project resource management plan, our project staff assignments, our team performance assessments, our issues log, our work performance reports, and our organizational process assets. We will use observation and conversation as a tool. It's obvious, we state the obvious. When you're looking at managing your team, you need to talk to them and watch what they're doing in some form or fashion. That doesn't mean look over their shoulder every day or scan their keyboard strokes or anything like that. It just means you keep your eyes open, you talk to people, you see what's happening, you observe the relationships between the various team members. You also have your project performance appraisals. Conflict management is a huge tool because you're managing a group of people now, and that group of people are bound to have a conflict. Your interpersonal skills, we've talked about that already. We'll go into more detail. And we get change requests out of this because we may need to change certain elements of the project. So it's natural to get change requests. Our project management plan updates we will get, and project document updates. We may need to touch our enterprise environmental factors and update those as well, and our organizational process assets. So, conflict resolution. You're managing a team of people. Conflict happens when people are working together. Some steps, and this is a simple model of conflict resolution. It's by no means the only model. It's just a simple one to keep in mind. Because we define the conflict. What actually is the conflict? Put it into words. The definition of the conflict is usually the first huge step in to be able to understand how to resolve it. We determine the conflicting parties. Who's really in the conflict? Sometimes in work environments, we have a conflict because of people talking and representing others in conversations or representing other positions in conversations. So it's important to determine who is really in conflict here. If I've said someone said something about someone else, you see the information there. If I said somebody said something about somebody else, I'm detaching the conflicting parties. It's important to identify who's really in conflict. Then, define what each party wants as a resolution. This will seem similar to a negotiation in some ways that we talked about earlier because there are similar styles. Negotiation is really a specialized form of conflict resolution. We're looking at it here in a more generalized form because conflict resolution has various ways of being manifest within a corporate and a cultural environment. Here we're looking at conflict resolution as it pertains to managing your team and the people that are in your team. So you want to define what each party wants as a resolution. If you have a conflict, you have two parties against. You need to figure out what resolution looks like. What would make each party happy? It may be as simple as an apology for a misunderstanding. It could be a change of behavior from party to party. You don't know unless you ask, and you have it defined for you. You determine the willingness to resolve. Some people don't want to get along. That happens a lot, and we know it does. In personal lives, we know it. As people go through divorces, breakups. There are people who were friends for years who decide not to be. Now, that's not what we're talking about in corporate life. And there are times when individuals must work with each other even if they don't get along. Getting along is not a requirement of project work. It's not a requirement. Meeting your obligation as a corporate citizen and an organizational citizen and a project citizen according to the rules that have been laid down. Corporate rules, governmental rules, laws, restrictions and requirements on proper behavior, ground rules within the project. We talked about those earlier. Those can cause conflicts. I noted if you talk on your phone too loud, people around you may take exception to that. I've seen ground rules for organizations that said we don't talk on our cell phones at our desk. And we try and take all conversation calls in our private rooms, and they had several on the floor that had phones in them that you could have a breakout meeting just between you and another party. Sometimes two people could get in that room, but they were really designed for one person to talk on the phone. Phone suites, if you will, phone booths with a closing door. If you break these kinds of rules, you can get conflicts. Resolving them is a matter of finding out who the conflicting parties are, having everybody who wants a resolution, and then be willing to resolve it. Confirm the conflict. And by confirm here, and I have like, my little asterisks and confirm early and often. The idea here is sometimes we have ongoing conflicts. Maybe it's behavioral, and behavioral I don't mean terrible things, but it may be annoying behavior. Tardiness can be a problem, where you have a disconnect about when people are supposed to be where they say. Or you can have a problem with meeting attendance, where people are coming in late, calling in late, which can cause a disturbance. Check on the conflict, confirm it early and often. Meaning, if you've talked through it, you've come to some kind of resolution, keep checking to see, has it been resolved? If it's not something that you as the project manager personally observe, then you need to especially make sure that the parties involved are communicating and that the resolution has been maintained. It may have started, but it needs to be maintained. And always seek resolution. Always don't let things just go. If you have issues, whether it's you have an issue with another individual, or you see individuals that have issues with each other, or they come to you, which they should, seek the resolution. Seek to fix the problem. And then confirm that the agreement is with all parties. Make sure that everybody is in at least nodding agreement, as we say, that we're all good. You don't have to go have lunch with people to work with them. You don't have to agree with them. You have to agree with how you're going to participate in a project within the environment you're at. And that's what's being asked. Conflicts will happen. Resolutions must be taken and made, and agreements need to be maintained. And document as necessary. So conflict management, there's certain styles, withdrawal and avoidance will happen. You also have an accommodating, smooth things over type of style, the compromise and reconciliation. You'll recognize these from talking about negotiation. It's very similar when we're looking at conflict. There's the direct style of dealing with collaboration, problem-solving type things. Now, issue management. When you're dealing with issues, you need to deal, this is not conflicts necessarily. It's issues that we might have with software defects, whatever. Issues management, you need to document and have some kind of formal documentation. And we're talking about a communication within the organization, the project team. And those formal documents need to be approached in a proactive type of approach. Issues can be disagreements in design choices. They can be disagreements in wording of certain documents, or they can be disagreements in overall approaches. But you need to look at it proactively. There needs to be a consistency of the approach and procedure to issues. What does that mean? That means we don't need a lot of separate documents that aren't agreed upon by the group. It can be part of the ground rules that you lay out. Here's how we deal with issues. If people have issues with each other, and that can be taken separately, but if they have issues between the actual working pieces, the requirements, the testing, etc., defects within the system, they need to be taken and be consistently, use a consistent process and procedures. And those things, consistency, include things like unique identifiers. One issue needs to be identified by a unique identifier, because if it's not, it might be noted by multiple parties. Think defects in software development. Think issues where users are looking at a screen maybe, or they're looking at a widget and they're noting certain properties. If we don't identify an issue uniquely, then we may get it reported multiple times without knowing that we have a preponderance of the issue being reported. So unique identifiers, update the targets, like target times, when is it going to be either resolved, or target for when we're going to report on it. Resource assignments, who's looking in on it? Having an issue with no one assigned to it is not going to help you a lot, because then who do you look to as you're the project manager when I say, has this been resolved? Do we have an update? Who am I going to ask? Closure should be noted. So when you close it, make sure that it's clearly noted and we don't keep looking at it. We don't spin our wheels looking at issues that we've put someplace else. For instance, we may have identified risks, and if it's moved to a risk category and we're dealing with it within our risk management type of system, then we don't need to be looking at it as an issue. Typically, risks become issues, but sometimes in working an issue, we determine that there may be a possibility something else may happen, and that can be turned and looked at in our risk register and noted there. So this is our project resource management. We're dealing with 5 different processes here. The estimate activity resources process is a new process moved from a different group, and we don't have the number for it yet, but it's being looked at under this particular knowledge area moving forward.